Hello, friends. It's 10 o'clock minus technology errors, Redmond time on a day that starts with a T, so time for .NET API review. We have a fairly full agenda today on one of these tabs over here. Not this tab, this tab. We have a couple reds, and I don't know, we're going to try and get through about this many items. We'll see how well we do. And there may be some other technical issues during the stream because I'm trying a new device today, so if we get the classic emo problems of something's too loud or you can't hear people, please feel free to bring it up in chat. Okay, so first on the docket we have revisiting memory extensions try write for UTF-8 79376.
Yeah. So we approved this one last time as a try-write UTF-8 as an extension method, and then afterwards, Levi pointed out that in general we try to avoid domain-specific extensions on non-domain-specific types. So this is a UTF-8 specific extension on span of byte, which is arguably akin to us adding arbitrary extensions on object or whatever. And that's a fair critique. And the recommendation was to instead move it to be just a non-extension static on a different type, like the existing UTF-8 type. So it'd be UTF-8.try-write instead of memory extensions.try-write UTF-8. I think the upside to that is what was just already stated. It's not putting UTF-8 specific extensions on span of byte or byte array, which could be any kind of data. The downside is that we have the existing memory extensions try write for span of char, which is sort of domain specific, so it makes sense there. And it just wouldn't, we'd lose a little bit of symmetry. But the suggestion of moving it seems reasonable, especially if we plan on putting more stuff on UTF-8. Right now it's pretty sparse, as Emo, I think, or Jeremy is showing, whoever's presenting. But we've talked about having other UTF-8 functionality like is valid and whatnot. And so if we start adding more stuff here, it becomes more of a central place to find UTF-8 stuff, and it makes it more discoverable.
Yeah, I'm certainly happier to move it to UTF-8 than have it just be an extension method available on the buffer type.
I think the one downside of it being on UTF-8 is UTF-8 is in the system text Unicode namespace, and so it has the same problem as system buffers binary primitives, in that no one knows it exists and no one ever finds it when they need to.
Right, and that was the sort of the discoverability aspect I was referring to. Is there has to be enough of like a reason to include this that you start kind of implicitly knowing about it.
It's a bit of a chicken and egg problem, right?
Yeah. But if it becomes useful enough, people will start learning about it.
Yeah, and I know that in chat yesterday, Steve, you had mentioned a scanf, theoretical scanf like functionality, which actually seems really slick. I would think that this type would actually be the better place to put that rather than memory extensions.
Mm-hmm.
And then you could make a symmetry argument that hey, now you have a format and a scanf.
Right.
System text Unicode. Alright, so system text Unicode UTF-8, so now try write UTF-8 goes back to try write because UTF-8's in the type name.
I think that's the only change, is that the method is renamed and the class changes.
The handler.
This becomes non-this.
Oh, that's true. And then the handler is currently try write UTF-8 interpolated string handler. Do we drop the UTF-8 out of that one as well, I assume?
Yeah, I would just name it the same as the method plus interpolated string handler. And it'll just be nested under UTF-8.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have to make the bot or the tooling happy.
We have added, just out of curiosity, we have added nested types under memory extensions in the past, haven't we?
Yes.
Okay.
But they're all, in
yeah.
general, anytime we've done those kind of nested types, they're all only meant for sort of compiler consumption and often are hidden, and that's the case with those as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I see. EB never. Okay. Just for the benefit of people on the stream, there was a question in the internal chat. What are the methods that are currently on UTF-8 and how are they different than system text encoding? The methods currently on the UTF-8 type allow you to do partial encoding, allocation free. So you can ask things like, please go as far as you possibly can, and then tell me how far you got. You can do that with system text encoding, but there is an allocation and the calling pattern is a little bit stranger. This is operation status based, so it's a little bit more familiar to people already doing operation status APIs.
We talked offline, Levi, about an encoding.utf8.try get bytes or a UTF-8.try encode or such a thing that was a non-throwing, non-operation status, do as much as you can and return true or false as to whether you were successful.
Yeah.
Is that something you think we'd add? And if so, do you imagine we'd add it as a new virtual on encoding, or do you imagine we would add it to UTF-8 or both? Where do you think that would be?
I imagine that being a virtual method on encoding, and then we would just override it everywhere. We can actually make a good default implementation for it that works with any arbitrary encoding.
Mm-hmm.
But we would obviously have a much more optimized implementation for ASCII, UTF-8, UTF-16, Latin 1, choose your poison.
Right. Presumably it would be a similar efficiency, maybe slightly more efficient than UTF-8 from UTF-16, since it would be dealing with just a Boolean yes or no versus operation status.
I suspect the efficiency, if we made that method, would actually be that it could do some early exit checks to ask, like, does this ever have a chance of succeeding ever?
Right.
And
it doesn't have
answer,
to do it. It doesn't have to go as far as it possibly can.
Right. If the answer is no, then we can answer that in O of one time, as opposed to, like you said, trying to go the entire length and then failing at the very end. So yeah, there are some optimizations.
It'd be worth, if we don't already have an issue on it, it'd be worth having one.
Yeah.
What are, and just to round out this discussion, what are other things that we imagine we put on? One of my concerns, not to derail this, I think what we just decided is fine. But one of my concerns is we've got UTF-8, UTF-8 formatter, UTF-8 parser. We've just shifted away from UTF-8 formatter and UTF-8 parser with the introduction and hopefully eventual full rollout of IUTF-8 span, formattable, and parser, which not entirely, but largely, significantly reduced the need for those other types. And then we've got this UTF-8 thing that's got currently only 2 methods on it. Now there's a third. Like, do we have a sense for what else we would add here in the future?
Yeah, there was an issue on it. For things like is valid, for things like 2 upper, 2 lower, and so on.
Right. What happened to that issue? Is it still there?
I'll find it and post a link.
Because I do think while there's value in the individual methods, I also do think there's value in making the type in general more complete, more useful, and so
yeah.
kind of a greater than the sum of its parts argument.
Right, and I remember Christoph Swalina was actually mentioning that, maybe a year or so ago, being things like, hey, I want to be able to do things like case conversion, or even,
right.
Compare these 2 buffers for, case insensitive equality. And that would be an appropriate place for that.
Yeah,
on
I
that
think
side,
we should reinvigorate that issue if we can find it.
Okay, yeah, I'll find it and post a link.
Okay, then I will call this one good. If my laptop doesn't fall over dead from encoding.
While we're waiting for Jeremy's machine to make forward progress, two other follow-ups related to this. One, I did open an issue in C# laying about whether we could enable the U8 extension, U8 suffix rather, for interpolation, in which case we could follow Emo's suggestion of dropping the append literal string and just have append literal read-only span byte, and there wouldn't be any transcoding costs associated with the literal portions of the string. And then separately, I also spoke with some folks on the JIT team to see how hard it would be if we were to not enable that at the C# level, whether we could still at the JIT level get the same efficiency, basically have the JIT do the UTF-8 encoding for this particular append literal call. And the answer seemed to be, if we care enough, yes.
Yeah, I get it. Go away. Exciting times. Okay, next up is flag to disable TLS resume or session caching in SSL stream 78305. Tomas, do verano.
You're muted.
Yes, so hopefully this should be a simple one. So basically when you go to SSL TLS handshake, there's an option to skip the full thing and basically restore previously used crypto parameters. That's mostly performance benefit. There are possibly some security implications. Somebody ran into a problem that some Windows services disallow that, and there's no way how to control it. In old releases, that's basically work only on Windows. In .NET 7, we made it work for Linux as well. So now it's more prevalent, and basically every TLS stack allows users to control it. So the proposal basically is to add a flag to say, I don't want to do this, I always want to do full handshake, and we would default it to false, so it's negative, so we opt out thing. And we already have stuff or Boolean for renegotiation, which is now rare and forbidden by TLS Monad 3, but the TLS resumption, it's similar but not quite the same. So again, the proposal is just to add a Boolean to possibly disable this.
I have a couple questions. We obviously have the ability to disable this on Linux since we had to do a lot of work to add it in the first place. We have the ability to disable it on Windows as well?
Yes,
okay.
I have proof of concept code which does it. There is some call you can call to disable it. So yes, on Windows we can control it as well.
Okay, and we don't have support for this at all on Mac, right?
The Mac is tricky. The secure channel we use, it's obsolete now for several years. So again, it would be easy to do, but Mac currently doesn't support it.
Okay, and then my second question was, this is being disabled only on the client options. We don't need to have a discussion about disabling it server side?
Maybe Stephen or the other can answer that. In practice, it would make sense to me. So one caveat of the the resume is that it also might impact your resources. So basically, the peers would store a cache of previous sessions, and then when you restore it, you basically use that, but it uses memory. On the server side, at least on Linux, we use the stateless stuff. So basically, the responsibility is pushed to client. But for symmetry, I think it would make sense to do both.
I agree.
Yeah, I was going to bring up the same of it seems like there's the server option also missing.
It's probably something I should thought through before, but the guy who actually run to it, because the server, he's out of control, can basically work. On the server side, I think you are typically more in control, but again, for the symmetry, I would support adding it to both a client and server.
So since on Mac we don't have the ability to influence this, and I don't remember what our story is on Android, is this gonna be an ignore or a throw?
Well, you cannot force it anyway, so it's basically negotiation. So since it's disabled TLS, then basically will be no up because it already disabled in practice.
Maybe it should be allowed TLS resume. It's defaulting to true.
Given that the environment variable is already called disable TLS resume, I do like the idea of symmetry with the existing setting. But otherwise, I would agree with you, yeah. Steve.
The setting is only for Linux, and we can also, I guess, fix that as well. So I would say if we feel strongly about the API or we have preference, I would shape the API, and for 8, we can document that the disable override changed as well, or remove it completely, since now there'll be API way how to control it, whereas in 7 we didn't. So the app context and the environment was the only one way how one could influence it if it doesn't work properly, and also be cross-platform, right? So we could remove the platform hack.
So I guess I have my hand up. My question was going to be, is this the right place to expose that knob and not something like Service Point Manager?
So we generally, I think we try to retire Service Point and Service Point Manager as much as we could, because it's global. So the options allows you to do it on per service basis. So for example, if you talk into service which can tolerate it like the link before or below, you can do that, you can disable it. But for example, if you go to Google or Microsoft, you can still do the default and basically skip the full handshake when you can. Or you can create HTTP clients, which some they do and some don't. So
I thought Service Point Manager allowed you to granularly control this per host name. Maybe not. I thought maybe it's not Service Point Manager, but some other.
No, yeah, it does. It does. On .NET Framework, it allows you to control settings per service point, and so then you can basically, do things per host effectively. But in .NET Core, Service Point Manager is completely neutered. It's not respected by HTTP client at all. It's only there for web requests, which is also deprecated, and most of the settings on it don't work. There are other things on SSL client authentication options and SSL server that I think you could make a similar argument for. Should this be global versus per request or per connection? I guess the problem with the only reason this one seems maybe a little special is because you're talking about things that logically might cross connections. Is that your argument, Levi?
Yeah, because I was wondering if this needs to be controlled at a layer higher than the entity which actually opens the SSL stream. Like if it has to be controlled for every connection that goes through an HTTP client instance, or every connection that happens to target some particular server.
I think what would be interesting is, so if I create a connection and I have, is this controlling whether state is persisted for a subsequent request or a subsequent connection, or is it controlling whether this connection is allowed to pick up state that remained from a previous connection?
I think probably be both, right? So the way how, at least in OpenSSL works, is when you disable it, or actually you need to not enable it, but it would not store it in a cache, and therefore it will not even try to offer the resume to the peer. So it would both. If I understood your question correctly.
I think so. I think it seems reasonable to have it on the individual connection. You're basically saying, if this is true in the systems, or if we say it's allowed and the system supports it, then this will both try to pick up something that was there previously and preserve for something subsequently. And if it's disallowed, it won't participate at all. And so it is sort of specific to that individual connection, whether it publishes and consumes.
So back to the service point manager, if we do that, we would still need to have it on a base SSL stream class, because then those entities would need to be able to pass it to the SSL stream, which actually does the work or would make it work or not. So
right, and service point manager is really only about the client. It's not about the server.
Right.
So like on the server, you could use, like with Kestrel, you can write connection middleware where you could easily set this for every or subset of connection. On the client, right, the sockets HTTP handler has the connection factory, so that gives you some control already that you can use with like HTTP client factory. So
yeah, I think it makes sense where it's proposed. If we wanted to also expose it elsewhere, we could choose to do so. Or Kestrel could choose to do so. But I think at the base level, we need this level of granularity.
Mm-hmm.
And then other things can be built on top of it.
Yeah. I didn't mean to propose that it should be moved elsewhere. I meant to propose that it should be like copied elsewhere. Like it is, if I have a sockets HTTP handler right now, like, can I specify this, yes or no?
with the connection factory, you
yes.
could.
You supply your own connection callback, and you do whatever you want.
Yeah, connect callback is.
Yeah, I see that. Okay.
So not easily, but it's doable.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe you should consider making this a first-class API there as well, just so that clients can consume it more easily.
Do we not have an SSL client authentication options on sockets HTTP handler?
Oh, you do, yeah. It's called SSL options. Okay.
Yeah, on the sockets HTTP handler we do, on the generic HTTP client we don't. So
right, but at socket HTTP handler level, this will just show up for anyone to
use.
Yeah.
That's
okay.
one of the things it will just light up, and in some ways I would maybe wait to see how much usage the API will get. I don't expect much, so I don't think it needs to be super sort of easy or prevalent, whatnot. And if you see,
I mean, you're basically asking for a performance regression. You need some good reason to do that, which is security or memory consumption or something. I'm not sure what it would be.
Right.
Yeah, and Kestrel exposes these options pretty directly as well. So
yeah, I could imagine people who are communicating with auth endpoints wanting to disable this, just because there are every so often attacks that come out against this type of handshake, and they probably just want to eliminate any possibility of cross-contamination between the requests.
Yeah.
But that would be a very specialized scenario, and like you said, they could set that from the SSL options property hanging off the handler. So, right.
So we want to make it possible, controllable, like the underlying stacks do, and I would just stay with that for now, and then we'll see.
Yeah. Perfect. I retract my my feedback then.
No, it was useful. I think it's useful to think about our use cases or other things. So.
All right. So I guess while we're talking about layering, is there a sensible way that HTTP client gets to be involved in this, or is that an extremely difficult exercise left to the reader?
I think that's a sensible one. So the sockets HTTP handler already exposed the client SSL authentication option, so that's super easy. And if you use just a plain HTTP client, there's a callback you can set, and you can do handshake on your own, and therefore you can pass all the SSL parameters to it.
Sorry, was that we should be adding something here, or that it is already possible?
It's already possible.
Okay. And so then are we going with disable TLS resume on both the client and the server side?
I still prefer the allow nomenclature, but if disable is what people prefer, especially because it's what we use for environment variables, it seems fine.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we really need to align the public API with the environment variable, since the environment variable doesn't go through, review.
Yeah, and again, we can fix that the variables as well if we need to.
My only concern with changing the environment variables, even if we've said they're not supported and they're totally hidden, is if someone was relying on them for some sort of security promise, then if we silently change them, we will just stop disabling it and we'll basically be re-enabling it for them when they upgrade.
Yeah, the environment work only for Linux, so it doesn't impact Windows, for example. So, but still, I see your point.
Maybe we just have a one release grace period where we honor both and then drop the old one.
I think that's reasonable. Put it in breaking change notices.
Yeah.
And if we have public API to control it, I would just remove the variables altogether, maybe again after some time. So it's reasonable to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'd do it basically the way that you do rolling server upgrade. It's both things are possible for a short amount of time, which would be one release. So leave the variables as basically on Linux, the environment variable would change the default value of these properties.
Right, that's actually what I was going to ask. Like, can you query these properties to figure out what the environment variable was or what the default was?
I guess there's a question of, would the environment variable be a forcing hammer, that even if this says allow true, the environment variable says no. That's a thing to work through. I don't have strong opinions.
Yeah. Well, I was actually wondering if the default value would be whatever the environment variable was, instead of just true.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I said at first, but I don't.
Yeah.
I don't have an opinion if it's that or if it's an override or what.
Okay.
I think if we plan to retard the environment, which I would be in favor of, I would just document it as the default and be the default to default.
Okay.
But
the app context setting would still be available, correct? Even if the environment variable goes away?
we
think
could.
it should?
Go ahead, Stephen.
I was just asking Levi if that was a suggestion or a question.
It was a question, because I could imagine people still wanting to do this process-wide.
So we could go either way, and I would say we don't have implementation on Windows at this point, so the app context also, it's Linux specific. So if we want to keep it, I would make it so that it will be override. It'd be override for the API. So basically have a way how to force it. So you mentioned the security issues. So let's say your app is completely oblivious, it doesn't really use it anyway. It'd be nice if you can disable it to, for example, app context switch as sort of big hammer. And if there's a security problem, there'll be a way for us to basically fork the full handshake. So I see value in that. If that answers your question. So
okay, cool.
So that's not how it works today, but we can make it work that way in 8. So basically have the app context switch override it, and also we would probably document it with the API saying, hey, this is the API to do that, but by the way, there's the app context switch, which we currently don't really advertise or announce, or it's kind of fallback option. So
okay.
All right, so we're good with what's on screen?
I think so.
And maybe last more comment that in that case, maybe the disable TLS resume would make sense for the app context switch, right? Because it's the nuclear red button saying, hey, you punch it, and you have the global way how to disable it completely.
Yeah.
That seems reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, in app context and environment variables, I wouldn't rename ever. But if we remove them, that'd be fine. But if we already have a name on them, that is what they are.
Makes sense.
Because string magic is difficult to debug.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. GitHub, stop moving my focus. Cool. Yes, I know. All right, signature type encoder dot typed reference 80812.
All right, I can give a quick overview. So this is part of the ECMA 335 namespace. There's a number of encoders in there: field encoder, parameter encoder, local variable, return type. Previously, type reference was only allowed in very specific contexts. For example, if you used it as a parameter type, then we would use parameter type encoder if it's that case, and then we would, for the more general case, we would rely on signature type encoder, which handles types in general, or has a number of APIs for types in general. But basically, we now allow type reference in much more places, such as a pointer type. So the ask. So the ask is basically to add a helper method on signature type encoder that mirrors the one that's currently on parameter type encoder, return type encoder, all these other encoders, to bring it up to par. This is not blocking. There at the very bottom there, alternative design. It shows that it's possible to just emit the right bytes into the PE stream and achieve the desired result.
Cool.
Yeah, looking at a website that doesn't support dark theming, emo. If you don't want a white screen on screen, let me make it dark.
It is dark if you set your system settings correctly. You're one of those weird people that have the light theme in Windows, but then want the websites dark themed. Like, I don't understand that.
I don't trust the Windows default setting. I will never change it off of the default. Give me a button on your website.
That's actually work. So because in CSS there is an easy way to do the system thing. It's very hard to do the custom thing.
Maybe I can tell the browser to default to dark themes.
I think you might be able to, because you use Firefox, so probably.
Yeah, that means there's probably an option somewhere, and it probably even works reliably. Yeah, so looking at the existing signature type encoder class, it looks like every method on it, or everything on it is a method, and nothing on it adheres to the way methods should be named. So the incorrectly named method here is consistent on the type. So
yes, and the other types like parameter type encoder follow the same pattern. They have, as called out in the issue, a method called type reference that returns void. So this is locally consistent.
Alright, so this seems correct to me.
Yep.
Any other feedback?
Do we have other? I mean, this is effectively. I mean, this isn't adding anything complicated. It's a one-liner, but it's filling a gap in consistency. do we have other such gaps that, like, is there going to be a trickle of additional things, or is this one special and sort of the last one-off we expect?
Okay, that's a good question. We do plan, let me take a look at, I don't know, like parameter type encoder, for example. So we do plan to, so this was part of the change to make type reference just be like a restruct. That change is not completed on the runtime side. There were some other restricted types such as arg iterator, and I don't remember, like a runtime handle of some sort. And let me take a look. For example, in parameter type encoder, I do not see methods for those types. So at least top of my head, I wouldn't think that we would need changes for arg iterator.
Does that satisfy your question, Steve?
Yeah, I think the answer was basically no, is we expect this to be it.
Yep. And good job, Emo. Your theming worked when I changed the Firefox defaults.
See? Steve Jobs would have told you you're holding it wrong. I'm a bit nicer than that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that your link style is pretty in your dark mode, but you know that can be a UX point for later.
You can say you're viewing it wrong.
I'm using the wrong kind of eyeballs.
Yes.
You need to download the new eyes.
Because you're a sailor at heart, right?
Wasn't there a Futurama episode about this? The iPhone?
Yes.
Oh, EYE phone?
Yep.
Yes.
Made by Mom. Alright. Next up, add stream wrappers for memory and text-based types, 82801.
Talk a little bit about this. So we have had several requests for having stream wrappers for multiple memory-based and text-based types. So I tried to bundle. So we have had three issues. One for string, one for read-only sequence, and one asking for memory and read-only memory. So I just bundled them together, checked a little bit the prior art, but then landed with this API proposal, which is string factory class, which a bunch of factory methods from text, which is for string, memory, real memory of char, and from data, which is memory byte, real memory byte, and real sequence byte. So yeah.
So I obviously, I mean, I've been a big proponent of us adding APIs for this, so I love the feature. I'm not sold on the shape. First, I don't understand the new assembly thing, why we would need a new dedicated assembly for this, but there are lots of things that you might want to get a stream for, and this is sort of a non-extensible way of creating things of a similar look and feel. So like if I had my own Steve string and I wanted a from text method, I can't make that look the same as stream factory.fromText. I have to expose it in a different way. So I'm still creating a stream and I'm still doing it from text, but it's going to live somewhere completely different. For that perspective, the extension method approach of as stream that some of the other libraries link to follows is useful, but I understand the argument against it of having, you know, string.asStream showing up prominently.
Yeah, many people. So yeah, that was the first proposal, and as you said, what the prior art does. But many people expressed and agreed, at least on this thread, that that is not a common scenario, and it will clutter the IntelliSense every time you try to use a stream.
I mean, yes, although no more than Link currently clutters IntelliSense for string, right? Doesn't Link end up like adding 200 extension methods to string?
Yeah, and it's awesome.
Right. Okay. But that is only if you opt into Link with the namespace with the using, right?
But it's the default
Yeah, but
using.
it's default.
Literally everybody has it. I mean, the real fix is in IntelliSense now you can hover over extension methods and turn the whole thing off, which helps a little bit, but then that might not be what you want in all cases either.
So what I'm hearing from here is to revisit the extension proposal.
I'm suggesting that there are pros and cons, and let's talk through them all rather than just the one that's on the screen. Because I don't love. I've made a mistake before of creating something that was called something factory, and I don't really want to make that same mistake again.
Yeah, since my name is currently on screen, my original suggestion was these were just static methods on stream, and then I think somebody said there was the down level package thing. It's like, well, then we can't touch the stream class, and that's when I was like, I don't know, throw the word factory on it.
I think there's two issues. Read only sequence is in system.buffers. Is that
oh, right.
Yes.
The layering there.
And so there's a layering issue.
Yeah, that's why. So I thought the reason for the new assembly was because of the read-only sequence being somewhere else, and so you will need a new assembly with the reference to system buffer, system memory and system runtime to use both. So
you put it in. If the only reason it was somewhere was to be able to support read-only sequence, you could put it in system memory or wherever it lives, but it doesn't actually require a new assembly, right?
Well, yeah, I don't know. That's why I was asking. Okay.
But I don't know. I'm imagining that over time we're going to want more than just these 3 or 4 types involved, and we're going to run into one where the layering then doesn't work, and we're going to need to put it somewhere else, and others are going to have types that they want to create streams from that we can't create them for, and they're going to look different. So I don't know. It feels.
I mean, maybe the answer is, don't try and put one box around it. It's that it's for the text one, which is, I think, the weirdest. Why do you want to stream from this? And where the universality of the extension method doesn't really seem to apply. Is maybe the stream one is just factory methods on stream. So we take the stream.from text, and then all the ones that are on buffer types become a pattern of methods or extension methods on those buffer types.
Maybe, although I can imagine. I mean, the moment someone says, "But I have a read-only sequence of char," that falls apart.
Yeah, I was going to ask why read-only sequence of char is not in there, but if you put it in system runtime, that you're dead in the water there. One of the other issues with putting it on stream is that it shows up on all of the derived classes as well. So now you have things like network stream.from text, which just returns a stream.
Yeah, you get the analyzer warning of you're calling a static method from a derived type, and you should rewrite the left half.
But can we use this as a forcing function to kind of push the language to have extension, static extensions?
Well, that's certainly where it's headed. I don't know if we're going to get it in C#12. If we knew that it was a guarantee, I think we would basically say, well, let's define these, wherever they live, let's define them all as static extensions on stream. Some of them could actually be extension methods. Some of them could actually be static methods. Some of them could be extension methods. And then anyone can put a static extension on stream that does it. I think, with roles, that's certainly where things are headed. I just don't know if that particular feature will land in C# 12. Now, if we know it's going to be possible in the future regardless, maybe we don't care. Maybe we say, all right, well, we design it knowing that static extensions are going to be a thing, and that's how people will get that symmetry. And then, we hold off on doing the read-only sequence one for right now. We do the ones that we can put directly on stream, and then others can come in the future when static extensions exist in the appropriate place, or something like that.
But what is that? Static extensions? It's a new feature? It's like a language feature?
Yeah, a long desired, proposed, and hopefully soon to be implemented language feature that via some syntax will enable the creation of extension methods that use off of a type rather than off of an instance.
Got it. I see. Okay. Yeah, that will help this.
And then read-only sequence can expose its own from data or a read-only sequence extensions class could define its own from data extension on the stream type rather than on a stream instance.
Yeah.
That sounds
Stefan
reasonable to
just
me.
Yeah, Stefan just threw in the internal chat the link to the proposal, David.
Thank you.
Fortunately, Julian left the conversation just in time.
He knew what was coming, I think.
Yeah.
Tanner can be our mole on that team.
But Steven's actually on LDM.
Oh, true. Yeah.
I mean, I think there is a lot of effort being put behind making this a thing. Like extensions, everything via roles, which are now, I think, are called implicit extensions, I think is the current terminology. So I think it will happen. I am the eternal optimist, Levi. But I've been pushing hard to get support for it even in C# 12, and I don't know how successful that will be.
When you say C# 12, well, so now the language does have the same cadence as the framework, or not really?
C# 12 is the version of C# that is currently being worked on, and that will ship with the .NET 8 SDK.
Oh, okay, got it. So, but still, even if the feature will ship on C# 12, it wouldn't be on time for this, right?
I mean, it could be.
It would ship concurrently if it's part of C# 12.
Yeah,
right? They would come together.
It might be. We might end up. If we required it for the read-only sequence part, either we could punt the read-only sequence part out if it was way too late, or we do it in July or something, even though we've done the rest of them as regular static methods now, for example.
I see what you mean. Okay.
In the proposal here, Stream Factory is not a static class. Is that intentional, or just we forgot to type it?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I forgot to type it. Yeah.
Okay.
It was originally partial class stream, and
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Then,
got it.
Then the read-only sequence layering threw it off.
Okay. So you do really intend for these just to have factories on them, nothing else?
Well, no. It sounds like now the plan is move them. The ones that we can move on to stream would be on stream, and other things would be. So read-only. Following the logic of what I interpreted Steve's current comments is we would do these modulo arguing about mixing read-only and non-read-only types as static methods on stream. We would cut read-only sequence, and when we get the language feature to allow doing static extensions, not to be confused with the fact that extension methods are currently static, then that's how read-only sequence and other types would get lit up.
Right.
Yeah.
That's my.
Yeah.
I think that's an ideal answer, and hopefully we'd be able to do that last one if it was deemed important in this release as well. If we got the extension static support, otherwise we'd do it whenever extension static support came into fruition.
Can someone remind me why is read-only sequence not in system runtime?
That's another answer. We could move it down. We never had a need.
I see. So there's not really a bad dependency. It's just that's where we shipped it basically.
Right.
Yeah. I think it ended up where it ended up so that it could go to a portable package. Like it needed to be in memory, like because it lives. Yeah, but we can obviously move things because span's shipped in a NuGet package, but is also
right.
not
But
in the NuGet package.
The moment we type forward it down, we won't be able to add to it down level.
Right, but I think at this point the question is, do we care, right? Is the type? We haven't touched the type in a while, I suppose, right?
I think. Actually, yeah, I don't think we've shipped the. It looks like it's part of the system memory package, which I don't think we've shipped down level in years.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's one other option, right? But like, there's nothing wrong with the method, right? It's just that we just did it because it seems reasonable, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then this particular thing, is this needed down level, or is this just a thing that we would have?
I think it's a thing that we would have.
So there's nothing wrong with putting it in stream then.
Right. Well, and we could, if we or somebody else wanted to quote unquote do it down level with static extensions, it could be done.
Right.
Except that
it wouldn't unify, but you could compile and it would work.
Except that down level would probably not support static extensions.
Well, it depends on your
I said support,
meaning of the word
not
support.
Yeah. It will probably work, but it would not be a supported scenario.
Yeah. Although interestingly, like so the whole roles are now implicit and explicit extensions thing, and the language is evolving in a way that will likely require
runtime changes.
Features of runtime that don't exist in .NET Framework, like ref fields. However, there is a way to do it for extension statics specifically, nothing else extension, but extension statics that could work down level as well. And so the current proposal is that it actually be done in a way where, while technically it wouldn't be supported because no version of C# newer than 7.3 is supported on .NET Framework, it could work.
I mean, personally, I think if you look at it from a pure out-of-band standpoint, I mean, extension methods and extension statics would get us pretty far. The only thing missing then is basically just constructors and properties, right? Which constructors have bitten us probably more than properties, but
constructors, properties, and then the big one and the hard one is interface implementations.
Oh, that's right. That has also bitten us, yeah.
So for the from text, we did introduce a few releases back encoding.create transcoding stream.
Yeah.
Would the first method group potentially just be encoding.create stream?
Possibly.
Because that would be a natural place to put it, where you don't have to worry about it, like you don't have to question where it goes. Because all of these take an encoding parameter anyway.
Curious, why did we do that as a static rather than an instance? I guess it would be weird as an instance because you're not transcoding the encoding, I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, it's because you're taking two, that's why.
Yeah, it's because the transcoding scheme says the stream it's modifying is text with this encoding, and now be text with this other encoding, and the proposal here is just half of that. I'm giving you text, give me a stream, aka bytes.
Yeah, well, I was prototyping this, and I think what I ended up using was an encoder inside the internal string that I was returning from text. For what it's worth.
I guess the other thing that we actually do have to answer before we talk about, the API shape is, does this mutate the memory of char or not?
Yes, it does.
Then you don't have enough. You're missing a parameter here because you somehow need to report out to the caller how many chars were written to the buffer. when the stream is written to.
Yes.
No, hold on. Oh, sorry.
So-
You're talking about from text, right?
Memory of char, yeah. So if you get a stream and you write to the stream as bytes, and that's being converted to chars under the covers, how many chars did I write to the memory of char text buffer?
Sorry. I see. Actually, no. I don't remember right now, but I think it wouldn't be writable. It would only be readable.
If it's not writable, why do we have one for memory?
Damn it. Yeah. I forgot. I might need to explore that scenario more.
Right, because that's coming back to, so in the design guidelines, now that we're talking about this, we say do not take a read-only and a non-read-only as overloads in the same method group. So if memory and read-only memory are supposed to do something different, then the method needs to be named different between them to convey the difference.
It's also weird, I think, to have a from text method not actually process the input. Like, it just sounds weird to me.
Right.
I mean, it is processing it. It's just deferring the processing, I guess.
Well, because if it's...
But it's not taking anything from text. It's being given a memory address and told to write there.
Fair, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it would be readable too, right? So it is potentially reading the buffer that you give it.
Is it? I mean, is it going to be like... Is it... I mean, I guess memory stream has whatever semantics it has for a read position and a write position and whether or not they're the same position, but the... You know, when I gave the suggestion of these names when changing the extension methods into just static calls, I did not envision anyone wanted write scenarios. So it was just from text with string text, from text with rom char, and then from data with byte, read-only memory, and sequence. And it looks like byte disappeared somewhere.
Yeah, I removed that one because I thought it was covered with read-only memory.
Well, especially if it takes memory and read-only memory, then byte can no longer be passed in because it's implicitly convertible to both.
Yeah.
You'd have to pick which one you want, and that's part of why the guidelines say don't do this.
Yeah. Going back to the writable stuff, I mean, if I remember correctly, in the from data case, it does make sense to write because it's very simple. You just need to write the bytes on the stream dot write into the buffer. But from text is harder because of the encoding, right? Yeah. So going back to the byte array stuff. It was also, I think Jeremy also mentioned that it's good to have it because people that is not that familiar with .NET is able to doesn't require to understand read-only memory and all that stuff.
So I think I remain convinced that from text could be an extension or either an instance method or an extension method hanging off of encoding. And if we wanted to support raw or read-only sequence of char, then you could put that extension method in the appropriate package. From data, can we just make that an overload of memory stream? The memory stream constructor?
Yeah, well, it could be. Because, yeah, basically you can easily return a memory stream. The problem is when the read-only memory is grabbing. Was there a case where you could grab it could grab like native memory, and
But
then memories?
That's the same thing, though. The stream would have to keep whoever's calling this would have to keep that alive for the duration of the stream.
Yeah.
I think it could be. I think your suggestion could be made to work, Levi. I think the question would be, what would the perf impact be?
Yeah.
Because either you'd have to extract the array offset and count from the memory and store it, but also keep the memory around for the case where you couldn't extract it, or you just have it implemented in terms of read-only memory, not in terms of array int offset, and every operation on the memory stream would need to fetch the span.
Yes.
So I think it would need to be prototyped to get a sense for the perf impact.
Okay.
But certainly, functionally, I don't think there'd be any problem with it. You would probably want two constructors in that case, one for memory of byte and one for read-only memory of byte, because memory stream does support being given a byte array and being told whether to treat it as readable and writable or just readable. If you gave it a read-only memory, it would treat it as only readable. If you gave it a memory, it could treat it as both. But I think that would require some prototyping.
Yes.
So that's another way to explore. Maybe you could imagine from text just being on encoding, the from data ones being memory stream constructors, and anything else is on its own. And read-only sequence could have its own .create stream or whatever.
Yeah. Is there wouldn't be hard to, well, I mean, if you're gonna do from data on memory stream, you would better do it with a constructor on memory stream, don't you?
Yeah, that was what he suggested.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I am sympathetic to Steve's argument. Like we optimize the ever-loving hell out of the memory of T span getter, but ultimately Steve is right. Doing more work is always going to have a cost over doing lesser work.
I'm not saying it's prohibitive. I'm saying I don't know if it's prohibitive.
Yeah.
But given that, the read-only memory could be backed by a memory manager and not have an array means you do have to keep that. Either you keep alternate paths or you do change the entire implementation of memory stream and find out how expensive that was.
Right.
Yes.
But it sounds like people are open to that investigation, though, and that it's not just a non-starter.
There's a lot of value in basically saying that an existing type is just more useful. And if you get something slightly different if you say new memory stream versus stream.from data. Because if you had a byte array, you could call from data even though it was taking a read-only memory or a memory. So having just one thing rather than two things that are subtly different, I think is valuable. So if we can make it work and work well as just another constructor on memory stream, yay. I just don't know how likely that is.
Yeah, well, I mean, and if we're going to make read-only sequence work in memory stream, that's definitely an alternate path because everything with read-only sequence is an alternate path.
Yes, but you could actually have read-only sequence of T dot, or you could have a read-only sequence of byte to stream extension method as well.
Right.
Sure. Or instance method, we could just add it directly on the type.
You can't add an instance method because it takes a T, and there's no way to project a T as a byte in the general case.
Oh, because limiting it to only be on the bytes. Yeah.
Right. Because that also means that wherever the extension method for read-only sequence of byte was, you could also have an extension method for read-only sequence of char, which takes the encoding and then projects it back out as a stream.
Mm-hmm.
So there's your symmetry.
All right, so it sounds like this definitely needs work. I just need to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, from an implementation perspective, I think like David can assume. I think he can assume that the from text ones are going to be approved in one way, shape, or form, and it's just a question of how they get exposed. And so the actual concrete implementation of that stream, he could go off and implement, and then we have to figure out how to actually expose it. For the data ones, I think there's sort of two paths there. One is prototype it on memory stream and see what the perf impact is.
Yeah.
And if that looks good, that suggests we go one route, and if it looks bad, it suggests we go the other route, and we, do the implementation of the read-only memory stream. Although I think we already have that, and then we figure out how to expose it.
That sounds good.
I mean, I guess the downside to all of this is that it very much ties it to .NET 8 instead of being available down level.
Yes.
But,
yeah. Well, I think that's our normal, mode of operating until we have a really strong reason otherwise, and I haven't seen such a super strong reason here. We do use it. We already have a read-only memory stream that we use in system.net HTTP and system binary data. So binary data does ship for net standard 2.0. It can continue using our internal implementation just fine.
I see. Okay.
My hope would be that if we did have a separate implementation from memory stream, that it would, one of them would be public in one assembly and one of them would just be internal in another assembly, but it'd be the same code file shared. If we do the memory stream approach and it's just an implementation detail of memory stream, we'll just have a separate implementation that we'll keep the existing implementation for that down level need.
Okay. And the other comment I would have, David, is if you don't have a need to write to a memory of char, don't implement it because it's going to be more complicated than you might think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because not only do you have to figure out how many chars were written, which means that the shape has to change, but you also have to figure out what do dispose semantics mean? Could dispose or close throw an exception? Stuff like that.
Yeah. I don't remember. I think I saw that scenario. It was like a couple of weeks ago. Seekability, for example, is almost impossible on a writable memory.
Yeah,
Because-
it would seekability would be an O of N operation.
Yeah.
Instead of an O of 1 operation. I don't think seekability is a huge concern, so you could always just make can seek false. But still.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for all the feedback. It was really valuable for me.
Okay. Then when email rejects things, he typically just copies the proposal as was proposed. And I clearly strive in all things to just be a clone of emo.
I hope not. So I just went to the restroom. How did we go from this looks reasonable, but make them factory methods to rejected?
I don't think.
What was
I
it?
mean, we're not rejecting it. I'm not hitting close. We're saying if memory. I think it's if we're saying if memory stream can work on memory and read-only memory without a significant loss of perf, then we want to architect this feature completely differently than proposed. And if it can't, then we'll come back and talk about doing it as as static methods off of stream.
Basically, do the from text methods have a greater affinity to encoding than they do to stream? So just like we have encoding.create transcoding stream, should we just have a create stream? And so it would live there instead. And if we did that, now we're down to just from data, and could those methods exist on memory stream as constructors instead of a whole separate implementation?
Gotcha. So it basically just needs work, right? Same
Yeah,
more or less.
Yeah.
Okay. You just said rejected, and I'm like, well, that escalated quickly.
No, you said the word rejected. I wrote needs work.
Yeah. And to the point Steve just brought up, like I do think that these would be affinitized more towards stream than they would be to encoding, because when people think I need to create a stream, they're probably looking to stream as a starting point, right? But whatever.
All right, so I think I captured the major notes. I hear no objections. Okay, next up, vector 128 and 256, add saturate and remove saturate. 82559er. I assume this is Tanner.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so basic premise is that today we expose regular edition, which works just like most people think edition works, where it wraps around on overflow. Most SIMD hardware has functionality that provides that, where it saturates instead, so it becomes the maximum value or minimum value rather than wrapping around. And so the proposal is we expose the cross-platform variant. That way users can access this without having to encode platform-specific versions of the APIs.
My initial thought is it should obviously be called something like add saturated or add with saturation or something, but it looks like when we did the intrinsics we called it add saturate, so this is consistent with our pidgin English we used there.
So notably on x86 and x64 we do add saturate. On ARM, I believe we actually call it no, I guess we call it add saturate there as well. I thought on ARM we actually called it with saturation, but I guess that's not the case.
Well, the code sample at the top of the screen here shows both ARM and x86. And they're both called add saturate.
Yes. Notably, as you may have seen, I just updated it. They're not supposed to be generic because we don't expose generic APIs on these types, as we've discussed in past ones. And since the proposal was marked ready for review, we approved Vector 512, and so that was missing here as well. But that was the only change. So just expanding it out to the explicit types and then adding Vector 512.
Well, we have an existing add method on all of the vector types, which is just add of t. Are you saying this would not be that?
Do we have an existing add of t?
Yeah, vector 64, 128, and 256 all have add of t.
So it is. Yeah, then I guess they can be generic then.
Did we say...
Can we go back and revisit some other APIs where we've expanded them unnecessarily?
We have
Is it just that these have the constructor or the construction methods are sealing it or limiting it to only the supported types, so the methods could be free generic?
Oh, it's the difference is because whether it's actually. Hold on. Sorry, I'm just trying to look at the API surface real quick. We actually aren't unnecessarily exploding on things, except for. Actually, we don't look to be doing non-generic versions, except for where we explicitly required on these types.
I just remember there was one we recently approved and recently.
Yeah.
I don't remember which one it was.
Let me open the list and find it.
Yeah, because while Tanner's looking at that, Jeremy, what you have on screen is vector 128 of T, but the actual methods like add, subtract, and whatnot are on the non-generic vector 128.
Well, the helper APIs that were exposed in 2014.
Yeah, this what's on the screen now is what I was looking at.
Yeah, so, I mean, presumably this is, going back to my question, that vector 128 of T itself says only the...
It was...
that these types are allowed.
Yeah, so it was shuffle, and the reason shuffle has to explode it is because it takes in a T for the vector, but it takes in an integral type for the indices. So that's why shuffle had to be exploded. Because if it was shuffle of T, then it would take float vector and float indices, and that doesn't work because you can't shuffle based on float indices.
Okay, so all of these move back to a single generic.
I mean, ultimately, I want you to do what you think the right thing is. I just wanted to point out that, we have an existing pattern of using generic instead of exploding.
Yeah, if we can use generic is better. In this case, there's never going to be a case where we support add saturate for a subset of types, so it should be fine for it to be generic.
Okay, because add saturate actually is sensible for things like floating point.
Yeah, floating point actually always saturates. So
add because you have infinite.
Will do the same behavior as add for float.
Because it just goes to positive infinity, or whatever.
It occurs to me it'll be cheaper for me to just duplicate one of these types into the bigger type and change its name. No, it won't.
Can I assume that's Tanner's general development metaphor that he uses?
I need it to be double templated. Oh well.
Double templated? I see.
Yeah, I need the generics to really be generics, and but then I need to be able to paste with a substitution.
I've just updated the APIs.
Yeah, but you wrote it in diff syntax, and I at least try to avoid diff syntax in the bottom comment, so I've rewritten it to get rid of all your pluses. So
my next question is going to be, do we need to do vector 64 as well? Because there is a vector 64.add.
Yes, we should likely do vector 64 as well.
Okay.
And we should consider vector of T as well at the same time. we've been trying to keep all of the types in sync with each other since they got in sync some time back.
So that would be vector.add saturate, taking vector of t as a parameter?
Yep.
Okay.
I'll see if I get this right. Yes, sorry both for the internal thing and for the stream of I don't have a second monitor on this computer, so I can only share windows and not screens. So if it's not in the browser, you don't get to see it.
I guess the only other saturating API I'm aware of is a narrowing saturating API. Do we need to consider that at the same time?
We already approved narrow with saturation a while back.
Okay.
Like in the past 3 months, we have.
Got it.
And then because I'm me, I'm going to write partial in all these.
Yeah. Was my understanding there correct, aside from add, subtract, and narrow, like there are no other real saturating operations?
Not cross-platform.
Okay.
ARM64 has a lot of combined instructions that do like a multiplication and an addition in the same operation for integrals.
Okay.
They do that since they've got the fixed width encoding, and they want to be able to represent more operations in the same amount of space. That way they aren't limited by the instruction to code bandwidth, which is directly correlated to memory speed. So those are all effectively internal optimizations based on patterns we recognize at the higher level.
But it sounds like, I think you prefaced it with, it's not something you would ever really care to expose at this layer, correct?
Right. If there happened to be a particular pattern that was super common and prevalent and a little bit more verbose, kind of like rotate left and rotate right, you can express those with shift, but they're common enough and verbose enough that we added a helper API, then we might consider it. But in general, that's a wait until enough people come up with a scenario and ask for it.
Cool.
All right. So did I get the ununited vector correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And I guess I should just double check that subtract saturate is what we called it. Yep. Okay. I just noticed the issue calls it remove saturate, which is special. All right. Are we good? Sounds like it.
You did not mark it approved.
I'm waiting on the labels the label box was spinning.
Oh, okay. I thought you had already switched to the other issue.
Nope. There we go. This goes back to, yeah, I'm down to 20% load, so I don't know where all the slowness is coming from. Definitely, I will look into why the GPU won't do the encoding on this machine. All right, an argument out of range exception dot throw if equal and throw if not equal 82667.
So we, as folks will remember, added a bunch of helpers to argument out of range exception. throw if 0, throw if negative or 0, throw if greater than or equal, etc. We did not add throw if equal or throw if not equal, and there's been some requests for that. We also have some use for it in our own code base. So the proposal is just another 2 in that series, throw if equal and throw if not equal, otherwise the same shape. One question I had is, assuming we add these, do we still want throw if 0, since that is, other than whatever Tanner will chime in about floating point oddities, that is effectively throw if equal, value comma 0.
So it's not just floating point, but rather there's also the consideration that we've constrained it to I-number base of t, and therefore we can use the more efficient t.is0 method, which can avoid allocations or other expenses for large types, or even for some reference types, because it can directly use the concept of the t's 0 rather than the general equals 0.
Well, I didn't understand the allocation thing. Where would allocation come from?
Imagine you have a t where you want to represent null and 0 as the same concept, for example, or you have a big integer where you have to where you may have to allocate a backing array, or a static read-only. You can generally avoid the additional copy, or even like a matrix 4x4, for example, where you've got a large 16-byte struct. You can avoid the additional copy and general comparison in favor of a more optimized comparison against 0.
Sure, it was the allocation that I wasn't understanding. Presumably for those types, there's a 0 that's well defined, so there wouldn't be allocation associated with comparing against it.
Assuming that it was cached as a static read-only or similar, yes.
Right. Okay. Anyhow, that's the proposal.
So are we then saying we should have a throw of 0 or no?
Well, we already do. My question is whether we still want it.
Well, we approved it in .NET 8, so it's not shipped yet.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's nice and declarative, and doesn't end up with, throw if 0 on a float, and then you have the 0 literal, and somebody's like, oh, you should pass the 0 float literal because reasons that don't actually apply, and so I think it's fine. It's not too much extra work, while maybe having an optimization in the generic numbers.
But presumably we don't expect enough use of throwing if not 0 that we need a corresponding throw if not 0.
Well, we have throw if negative or 0, throw if negative.
Right.
So it'd be weird to have throw if 0 missing. Maybe we should add throw if not 0.
Yeah. So
that seems super rare.
What's the value of not equal?
You're basically requiring that the value be a specific thing. You've got you currently support a single protocol, so you've ensured that the protocol version you're accepting is 0 or 1 or whatever, but in the future you open it up to allow multiple things and then you have a different check.
Yeah, also like a common thing for me would be we have correlated parameters. So you say if this one is set, then this one must be false, for example. So you would put the throw under an if check. Common enough, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, Sergio had an example of comparing the lengths of 2 inputs to make sure they're the same.
Right, another one.
Okay, so correlated parameters, I guess, definitely makes sense. I was just thinking, like, who's writing a thing that's like, throw if x is not equal to 5, but I guess, as you mentioned, something being a future extensibility point, and
I mean,
that's the same as throw on range, where your range has just collapsed down to a single number. So,
yeah. I did actually find a few places where, as I was looking to see where we would use this ourselves, we're validating that some sort of reserved field or argument, against whatever is in pointer.0. Like if it's not in pointer.0, fail.
Right. But this is more rare managed APIs, right? That's not the.
Well, we had that in our interop services code in C# in our interop services code.
So
yeah, but that's because the native code is behaving that way, right? Because the native code had a DW, I don't know, dword like reserved or whatever, right?
Right. We probably corresponding to that. Where we were doing checks to say, hey, we know the thing is going to fail if we pass down something else, so let's proactively check.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sorry, I cut you off, Stefan.
Oh, no worries. I was just saying that, like, with these throw-if APIs, like, they're not ideal if there's correlated arguments, right? Like, you'd almost want to analyze saying that you want, like, a literal or, like, some sort of constant value there, because otherwise it's not giving you, like, an informative message on, like, where did the other value come from, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, there are a bunch of places where I've hesitated to use these. I mean, we use the helper stuff in a lot of places, but like when I was looking yesterday where we would end up using throw if equal, throw if not equal, there are a bunch of places where we do things like, if argument and some bit mask does not equal, or does not equal 0, then throw. Like we're either looking to see if it was outside of a range dedicated, as designated by a bit mask or in the range or whatever. And the error message that you're going to get out is strange in that case, because you're going to get some random number and 0 as the two things being compared. I think that's very similar to what you're saying, Stefan, which is, I'm comparing two lengths. I'm comparing array.length and span.length, and the error message, if they're not equal, is going to be 4 does not equal 3.
Yeah, whereas the correct exception in that case would be the array length paren 4 does not match the destination span length paren 3, or something like that.
And so, there's a question. You can certainly have it refer to the right parameter, right? You can explicitly specify the parameter you want it to be about. And the question would be, what do we want to do in those cases? Do we want to make the error message throws less specific, or maybe even no error message at all, and it's just the default for argument out of range exception with the parameter, and then it can be used in more cases, but it's nondescript as to why it was happening? Or do we want it to be specific, but because it's so specific, you don't use it in all the cases where that is the check you're doing, but you want a different error message?
I mean, we could add another parameter, except we can't.
And we could, but most code, including ours, gets those messages from resources, and so you're passing in as an argument sr.argument out of range _ whatever, and the whole point of these methods is to be super cheap in the fastpath, but you're then doing that thing in the fastpath.
Well,
those resource lookups.
Yeah, so I mean, if we, fair enough, they amortize though, right? Like once you've called it and looked it up, it knows what it is.
There's still expense.
Fair enough. But the weird would be, because we want the parameter name to be defaulted and free, the only place that we could add the string of what message to use would basically be between value and other, because otherwise we'd have the string in position 3 differs in semantic meaning between two overloads.
Right. You basically have to give the method a new name with message.
Yeah. At which point, the only thing we've done for you is give you I assume that these are going to do the same double method for inlining and throw helper type benefits, and so the only thing we've done for you there is help you get your method is now inlineable because we removed the throws.
Right.
And so that seems weird. So yeah, so I guess that correlated parameters mean you really would not want to use this because you are losing the developer information of what they did wrong and how they, or really you're missing how they can recover from this.
I think it depends how much you care. And we could choose to do the nondescript message thing, and then we're not providing, the general information, but you would be able to use it in theoretically more places because a lot of places don't provide a more detailed message. Just say, hey, you messed up, figure it out. Yeah.
Maybe I'm at loss, but what's the problem with providing the message that basically says the value was not equal to this?
It can make zero sense in the context of the argument someone actually provided. I call compare strings with string 1 and string 2, and the error message I get back is 3 does not equal 4.
And what it meant was your strings weren't the same length.
Why not, Emo, were you asking like why not just add a string to the API that would be the name of other in the message? Because that's where you get into the overloading mess.
No, I mean, you're still throwing for all, because I see now, because you're not passing in a parameter, you're passing in literally values.
So we do have the name of the first parameter, and we include that in the message, but the message would be like string 1 was wrong, 3 does not equal 4.
Right. Like when you're comparing lengths, if you were going to do that with row if not equal.
Yeah, if you did it with the string length, is the caller argument expression going to capture like string 2.length and say that's the name of the parameter?
So in those cases,
either
you leave it, and then we're violating, I think, one of our guidelines around what you actually put as the argument, or you explicitly do your own name of, and then you get the parameter name, but it's less meaningful.
I mean,
So
if the message, if the message just says that, let's say the first argument is, P1 or whatever, right? And then other is some value you're comparing to, but it would still be, I think, reasonable to say the exception says expected parameter P1 to be of, to have the value X, which it didn't, or the other way around, right? Then the condition why that might trigger, you might have to look at the docs and say like, okay, why is that expected here, right? And that might be complicated to express, because it's like, well, if you set these flags, or if you do this mode, or if this other property is set or whatever, then this must be this value, right? So it's still be reasonable, but like
the way this is currently implemented is, if in that string example, compare strings with 2 string arguments, string 1 and string 2, and you pass in ones, and the length needs to match, and they don't. So the first one is length 3, the second one is length 4. You'll get an argument out of range exception for the parameter string 1. Saying expected 3 to equal 4, or value 3 does not equal value 4, or some text like that.
So why don't we just take 2 caller argument expressions, one for value, one for other, and format
That's what I was going to say.
Literally format it as, value expression does not equal other expression, or value expression equals other expression.
But that's where I was saying, where we would be dumbing down what we provide. Like right now, we explicitly include the values in the message that were not equal. So we could choose to make it less useful for the cases where the values would be significant in the argument out of range exception, in order to accommodate the cases where you're trying to use it more generally and those values are not meaningful.
But do we have to dumb it down? Why can't we just say value expression, and then in parentheses put the actual value does not equal other expression, and then in parentheses the actual value of other? Or
because the parameter name that's supplied goes into the argument out of range exception.param name property. And so if you were comparing string.length, the param name is going to be string.length, unless you explicitly correct it via doing your own name of to say, no, I'm actually talking about string 1, not string 1.length. If you don't correct it, then the error message will be more meaningful. It'll say string 1.length, and in parentheses 3. But it'll violate our guidelines of the argument out of range, or argument exceptions in general, referring to the name of an actual argument, not something dotted off of it. And if we explicitly override it if the caller explicitly overrides it by passing their own name of, rather than relying on the compiler to fill it in, and they just specify string 1, then it would say string 1 3, and that's not good either. So we'd have to choose which poison we want to drink.
I think in the common case of how you'd be using it, you wouldn't be one of them might be a literal and the other one would not be, and so you'd be a little bit pessimized in that case. But in the other case, you'd be such as correlated values, you'd be directly comparing two expressions like source.length and destination.length. And so you'd end up with enough information that the message was meaningful, even if the exception didn't track the actual values outside of the string.
I don't understand.
There's a constant. What is that argument expression? So it's just the constant, right?
It's literally the text that was written as that argument.
So if you wrote 0, it'll say, like in my thing that I doodled on the screen of, I think that's what I was hearing Tanner say, is if you had for the other or whatever the value it's supposed to be equal to is, whatever that was called, if that was the literal, 0, then this would say the protocol value 5 is not equal to 0, 0.
Right.
Not bad.
And you'd be like,
redundant.
Why does it say 0, 0?
But let's say, what is the suggestion for what you do when the things you're comparing are string1.length, comma string2.length?
Well, then it would say the string1.length value.
Right.
And then in the parentheses, you'd put you'd actually call value.toString in the failure case.
Yes, and I'm saying in that example, param name, the property on the exception, will also be string1.length, which we have analyzers that say don't do that.
Yep.
So that's an argument against this API in general, if we think people are going to put .length on,
Well, in those cases, you say comma name of string1. Right. So you can override it, but then you're impacting the. Right. I'm saying you can have one but not the other, right? You either get the exception message to make sense, or you get the param name to follow our guidance, and you don't get both.
For what it's worth, I think a lot of people, and maybe it's just me, and maybe I'm just one of those people, but they're I don't like the analyzer that says don't use string.length as the name. I often want the expression string.length to be there. That way I'm aware, because I'll often take it directly as the parameter name, so it will be clear to the user that it's source.length, and that's the thing that is, for example, negative, or that was out of bounds of the other value. And so I actually very much enjoy and prefer to have it say source.length or string.length.
Which I think is reasonable. I think the analyzer could be slightly smarter, right? If it's a literal, it could say, well, does it have a dot? Okay, is the thing before the dot actually referring to a parameter? I think that would be reasonable, right? And in this case, it's just dynamic at runtime.
Well, I think the analyzer, sorry, just to chime in, the analyzer was coded to conform to the guidelines that are written, which is don't include argument param names that aren't the actual parameter name.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that you could say, basically, the intent of the guideline was that you actually refer to real parameters, right? So that you don't have a typo in there or something, right? But if we say, okay, you have an expression that starts off of a parameter, dotted off of it, you could say, yeah, it's still logically referring to that argument, right? So it's kind of like a refinement of the rule. It's not saying the rule is no longer valid, right?
You could. My point was the analyzer is conforming to the guidance. If we want to change something, we're changing the guidance.
Yes, and I think that's a reasonable thing. And this is special for this one because the other ones, why does this only occur for this equal one? Why is it not a problem for the other throw helpers? Isn't that the same problem?
I mean, technically, if somebody called argument expression.throw if null param.property,
it's the same problem.
We'll do the same thing there. It's just less common, and here the most likely example we've come up with for not equal is only relative comparisons.
Right. It's relevant in the other cases as well. It's just the minority case, whereas this one is the majority case.
Right, because the other ones are always basically comparing against a constant concept, whereas this one is comparing to arbitrary values.
And
so throw if negative, a lot of our calls will say throw if negative foo. Some of them will say throw if negative string dot length, or that's a bad example, but foo dot count or whatever, comma name of foo.
Right.
And it's not perfect, but it'll say the value is negative, and it'll show you foo. So it does show up. It's just less comment.
I think so. The question is, do we want to have a separate discussion on this, or do we want to make a decision right here, right now on this guidance? We have like 3 minutes left, so it seems like we could make that decision, right?
My own view is that we should update the guidance to account and allow for things like source.length and foo.count.
I mean, so one of the problems with that is you're now encoding a language. You've decided it's C# or something that looks like C#. Like if managed C++ uses an arrow, then and they supported color member expression, then they would now print it with an arrow, and so now you're representing the language of the caller.
But that's fine, right? Because it's arguably it has occurred in your code or in somebody else's code. I think the question is, like, what is the point of the guidelines, right? The point of the guidelines was to refer to an actual parameter, right? Which this would still do, right? If a developer would see this, they would see, I don't know, A::B or A arrow B or A.B, right? As long as there's a parameter called A, I think they're probably able to piece it together, right? The problem is when you refer to things that don't exist because it was a rename or something like that, right?
Yeah,
which happened in the past.
I thought part of it was for things like, debuggers of if you're running and you see the argument null exception, that it should be able to be smart and look at the param name and then go be like, hey, right here, I know what expression to highlight for you. And once we start telling it that it can be complex expressions, now the debugger needs to understand all of the complex expressions that it can be. I mean, they'll have to have some, if they're doing it, they have to have something for if it doesn't work. But I thought that the guidance there was more about tooling and consistency than about just what people print.
I'm not aware of any tooling that actually does that today.
Right? It's like, what debugger are you using, and can I try it?
But even if they did have that handling, they'd likely have to handle the expression case anyways, because people can already put any text in there.
People do that, yeah. I think it's probably not that they have to handle all languages. You would just have to say, like, if it's a non-alphanumeric character or something, right? I mean,
I guess that's true.
It wouldn't be.
It always is going to break at a non-identifier character.
Yeah. And I think the question is anybody, I mean, these are all argument validations, right? Do we really expect anybody to have catch handlers that does a switch over the param name? Not really. So now it comes down to just tooling where the bar is already lower. And I think most of our tools, like the null reference one, for example, I don't think it looks at the actual exception. I think it just looks at the IL offset, I think. And so that there's some handshake between that and the runtime. So I would be skeptical that anybody relies on that thing. I think that, as I said, I think the point of the guideline is you get an argument validation, you get a parameter name that you messed up, and then you go to the docs and say, okay, what are the expectations for this parameter, right? Which is basically the inverse of what Win32 does today. You pass in a structure with 400 fields, and you get, E invalid arg or something, and it's like, great, which of my freaking 400 fields was wrong, right? So the intent of this was to tell the developer what they messed up, right? And I think if you give an expression that starts off of a parameter, I think you still satisfy that, and arguably you make the experience better.
Yeah, and that's why I actually like including the full expression, because there's been plenty of times where just the name isn't enough information to indicate like what was negative. There's many cases where you could, for example, pass in a collection or similar, and you might say that it's negative, but there can be many concepts of negative, like this is more common with like vectors, for example, where you have both a length and the concept of negative values, because they're number types as well. And so having the more descriptive, like, this is the exact property we checked against, helps expose the relevant information to the user and help narrow down where the bug might be.
Well, as far as what made it into the book, it was just set it. We may have long-standing tradition that says that we name it only the name of a parameter, but nothing other than if you're in a property setter, the name of the argument is value. We don't seem to have an answer in the can.
Then we should do the quote right thing here, and we should either get rid of the analyzer or significantly cut back on what it warns for. We had very explicit discussions about the guidance saying, don't do foo.length, just do foo.
Yeah, I mean, it could be in here somewhere else and more complicated, but this is the only hit of param name, and this, here's everything about argument exception fits on this one page minus Jeffrey and Jason's comments. So
I understand this would be like new guidance, but like if we were going to change the analyzer to be more relaxed, would we still like check that it started with a parameter name? Like, I don't know, it seems reasonable to me. I guess I just don't see the value of like always keeping it exactly a parameter name. But
yeah, so I think Stefan, that would be Steven's point of maybe we would just teach the analyzer the same break at the first non-identifier character, and as long as that looks like it's still mapping to something, we would still get something out of the analyzer if you're not putting garbage here. Because part of the value of that analyzer would be, I think, don't get the parameter name in the message backwards, and which may be a different analyzer. But so we may just need to tweak the analyzer and decide on, for platform consistency, and then for FDG4, whenever that happens, to write down what we think the answer is. So how do we feel about these methods? Do we want to...
I think we should add them.
Are we going to hold off until we figure out what we want the message to look like, or?
No, I think we would go back and tweak the message subsequently.
Okay.
There was a comment about, should we be taking two param caller argument expressions? We don't in the other comparison cases. I would want these to be the same as the other comparison cases that take a value in another.
So you're talking about like greater than, less than?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we could, especially if they haven't shipped, we could fix them to add the second caller member name.
I was going to say, I would suggest
or caller argument name.
We go with them as they're listed. These are consistent with what we've already approved and rolled out. And then if we want to add another caller argument expression for the other, we do so for all of them, not just these two.
I guess the one other interesting thing here is we constrained the other APIs, or I guess never mind. I was thinking we constrained these ones to iNumber, the greater than to iNumber as well, but it's just iComparable. So
right, the only ones you constrained to number were the 0, negative, or 0, and maybe one other.
Throw if it looks like it's just throw. No, I'm looking at the wrong class. I'm looking at something in ASP.NET Core. Never mind. I was about to say throw if negative looks to take explicit types, but that was an ASP.NET Core function.
right. I think I captured 40 minutes of discussion there.
Looks good to me.
Do you think we should have a follow-up issue about the analyzer?
Yeah, I mean that's sort of foofily referenced here in consistency and stricture about a parameter rooted expression versus a parameter expression, where I made up the term parameter rooted expression, but I think we all know what it means. And so if we think it's fine to pass string.length because that would look better in the messages, then we should make sure the analyzer accepts that.
Right. Well, my next question is: we have hundreds of uses of these argument out of range exception throw helpers now, and a non-trivial number of them use name of explicitly in order to avoid having the dot whatever. We might want to go and delete all those.
Yeah, I think it would be kind of a case by case of, does this add additional clarity or let us simplify the code? And if there's not a good reason to exclude the .x expression, then we should just allow it. That's just my own preference there.
Yeah, I mean, before we move off of having a default consistency of only using a parameter expression in these, I think we'd want to see if maybe like Christoph has longer history of that he can easily recall. So I don't know if we should go changing anything right now and changing our implicit stance of parameter expression only in these values, but I think that this is pointed out that we need to understand what we think our rules are, because clearly they never got written down. So I think this is a pending discussion that I would push on Emo, but he left. I guess I'll still push it on Emo. AKA we should talk about it, or we should figure out when and how to have that discussion, because it is a good thing to lock down on, and especially to be clear in what our ecosystem guidance is. So I think we call these approved, and then we're early in the release cycle, and we may change these and the greater than and less than, and write down some formal guidance on how we feel about param name, other than it should be set. Sound good? Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap up because we're 10 minutes over.
Yep, ship it.
That sounds good to me.
Yep.
As area owner, I guess I will take it on myself to log an issue explicitly tracking us doing the consideration prior to RC1.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. So with that, we are, as I just mentioned, 10 minutes late for ending, which I guess makes up for 10 minutes late of starting. And I chose to be in a bright room instead of my dark room and didn't bring my gavel up, so I have no gavel to bang. But sorry for any issues my laptop, being the stream host, has caused. I'll look into getting them fixed, along with getting the dead desktop fixed. And so thanks for joining us. I think we had good discussions today, and we'll see you all next time we'll see you at our same .NET time, same .NET channel,